Hello, and welcome to the Costume Guild's presentation on costume design. We will start off by discussing the history of costume design, as well as the costume designer's role in theatrical production. This section was created by Ashlyn Gray and Danette Taylor. So what exactly does a costume designer do, and how does it affect the overall performance? Well, the costume designer controls the most personal aspect of a production. That is, the aspect of a character that an audience member will identify most closely with. After all, we all dress ourselves every day, and thus can easily interpret a character's intentions and attitudes when they don a set of clothes. Additionally, a costume designer can help to create entire themes and add to the tone of a scene. For example, in a sci-fi film, if some characters wore medieval garb while others wore futuristic clothing, it would feel odd and disorganized. However, if all characters wore medieval garb, then in this case the costume designer could be trying to show a contrast between old and new, which could be interpreted in a multitude of ways. Costume designers do not work alone, however. In order for their costumes to make sense, look good, and reflect the overall theme and tone of a production, a costume designer must work closely with the directors and actors. They must work closely with the sound director to ensure that the actor may be heard. A full-face helmet may not be the best choice for a character with a lot of lines, even if it makes sense logically that the character would be wearing one. The designer must work closely with the lighting director. More on that later. Finally, the designer must work closely with the head director and actor to ensure that the director's vision for a character and the actor's ability to act out that vision may align. A costume designer can use many techniques in order to convey the director and playwright's intentions for a character. Color is one of the main tools a costume designer uses, as it can easily show a character's inner thoughts and motives. Red, for example, can help showcase a character's seductive or devilish side, where black can almost always be associated with mourning or evil. In addition, the style of a costume can heavily influence an audience member's impression of a character. A character in a clean military uniform, for example, may be instantly associated with discipline and seriousness. A character designer must also take into account the era in which a production takes place. As stated prior, medieval garb, or even modern clothing, would feel off in a sci-fi style of production. In addition, inaccuracies can lead to an audience member's suspension of disbelief being stretched a little too far. It's the costume designer's job to ensure that the costume is as period correct as possible, while still achieving the desired effect by the director. Now, we will move on to the history of costume design. In ancient Greece, costume design was quite similar to modern design, with actors using their clothing to denote social status and gender, and some props such as walking sticks to denote age. Famously, the ancient Greeks also used masks to show exaggerated expressions and allow an actor to play the opposite gender. In ancient Western theater, costume was quite different, however. Rather than a costume designer providing and creating a costume for the actor under the supervision of a director, the actors themselves would provide their costumes. From Shakespeare's time to the early 19th century, actors would simply wear the finest clothes they had on hand, regardless of their character or the time period specified in the production. This could often result in some odd discrepancies between a character's costume and their actual character. For example, if the wealthiest actor was playing a lowly peasant, then it would be likely they would be wearing the best clothes throughout the production. Starting in the 19th century, costumes began to reflect their characters in a much more accurate way. Rather than the actor's finest clothing being their costume, an actor would don clothes appropriate for their socioeconomic status, gender, mood, cultural identity, job, or other such defining feature. Examples of using costume in such a way in Western theater can be found as early as the 18th century. However, using costume as an integral part of a production's tone and theme didn't become common practice until the 19th century. An excellent example of simple but easily identifiable period-correct costume would be bell-bottom jeans with designs painted or drawn on them. These are easily identified with the late 60s and early 70s hippie era, and thus are an excellent way to give an audience member an idea of a character's personality, while also reinforcing what era the production is set in. As mentioned earlier, color plays a huge role in costume design. Red for violence, love, and just to make a character stand out in a very bold way. Black for mourning and evil. Blue also for mourning, but also for calmness and clarity. White for clarity, purity, wisdom, and occasionally wealth. Mismatched colors such as purple and green, or pink and orange, to symbolize madness. Colors help to make a statement about a character's inner thoughts and moods, but it does so much more than that. In conjunction with the set designer, an actor's costume can cause them to blend in, stand out, or even completely change the tone of a set when they come on stage. To put it simply, color is a vital tool in a costume designer's toolbox. Costume and costume designers are vital components of an acting troupe, but they are only one of the cornerstones of a production. If the costume designer, director, set designer, lighting director, and sound director don't communicate effectively, the production can lose its punch. The director and costume designer must both have a solid understanding of what the characters look like. Many production teams use reference photos to achieve this. Additionally, the costume designer must have a firm grasp on period-correct wear. Without it, many aspects of a historical play may cease to make any sense in a modern setting. As a final point, costume designers must work well with the actors themselves. For example, if in a scene an actor is fencing, the actor must be wearing a costume that allows much more freedom of motion than a scene where an actor simply sits on a throne. We will now move on to an interview with a professional.
Okay.
Okay, so can you just please introduce yourself and...
Yeah, I'm Mrs. Schultz, and I have taught dance here for about 18 years now. And part of the job is to figure out what costumes everyone will be wearing for the show, which is challenging.
Yeah.
And then I have always had the pleasure of having a wonderful tech person who is Ryan Eckhart this year, and he's going to be helping us figure out some beautiful lights to go with the mood of the dances.
And to prepare for a show, how long in advance are you guys planning the costumes to your dances for the show?
Right. Our show is in April this year, April 23rd and 24th, and we've been planning since the day we got back from the Christmas break. So since January 7th, a lot of the dances have been choreographed and costumes have already been selected. Some costumes still need to be selected, but we try to kind of get that started as soon as possible because it's a big puzzle. We have about 30 dances in the show, and to figure out how to outfit them all properly takes a lot of effort.
Okay, and then so when you're thinking of a costume for a dance, what do you have in mind for it?
First thing that we think of is the mood that we want to create with the song, the storyline of the song, and the movements in the dance. If something is happy and upbeat and has a lot of sharp movements, then we might want more color and vibrancy. Maybe if it's a character dance that is something with a hat and a cane, we might want sparkly gold or sparkly silver. If it's serious in nature, we might go with blacks or blues. If it's something that talks about childhood, for instance, we might do white. So I let my students do a lot of the selection in terms of what the colors might be. And sometimes it's kind of fun to play with the opposite or different color from what one might expect.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different things to think about.
And hold on, I don't know the question. I'll just have to figure this out.
You were talking about the color of the lights affecting the costumes. And if we have white, it's perfect because it picks up whatever light we put on it and creates that mood. If we have black, we need to do probably a white background so that we can project some color or something onto the projection. Or sometimes we just use everything really stark, black and white, if we want to create a really hopeless mood or melancholy. And if you have something, one time I had a dance that had a green costume, but because of the light, everyone thought that it was a dark blue and no one realized the color of it. So when people say, oh, I don't like the color of this costume, they need to bear in mind it might be completely different by the time we project color onto it.
Yeah. And my last question is, do you think that without the right costumes, without the right idea in mind, it can make or break a show?
Yes.
Yeah.
And we've had examples of that because we've had a show where dances were very well presented and the lighting made the mood just seem so much more intense. And then we've been asked to present the same dance in, say, a high school auditorium for a school. And even though the dance was still the same dance and the girls still did, or girls and boys as the case may be, still did as good of a job, it completely lost a lot of its drama because there was no control over the lighting. The sound also has an impact, and that takes away from how free the kids feel to move. Because if they feel that drama of the lights and the sound on the stage, they actually perform better. So it can really make a big difference.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you for interviewing us.
Yeah.
I appreciate it, Dan.
I'm gonna show you that good guys don't always win. I'm gonna show you the bloody side of living in sin. So when you're 6 feet
So how does this relate to Hamlet? In Hamlet, like all Shakespeare performances, costume design is crucial to the communication of a character's personality, social standing, and inner emotions. The character of Hamlet wears dark, passive clothing, which communicates his inner turmoil and grief. Later in the play, when he decides to play the role of a madman, he does a costume change. Hamlet is banking on the convention that one's physical attire is a reflection of one's state of mind. The initial costume of Ophelia immediately portrays to the viewer who the character is. The white color symbolizes her youth and purity, while the light but richly detailed fabric indicates her nobility.